Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, the Torah and Psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post in Beshalach, we read about the miraculous event of Kriyas Yamsuf, and this is really the conclusion of the entire process of Yetzias Mitzrayim with the Makkos, with Kriyas Yamsuf now, with all the open miracles being performed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring out the Bnei Israel from the slavery in Mitzrayim. And within this miraculous event, within all these miraculous events, we have an interesting pasuk that describes when the Bnei Israel came out. The pasuk says, "V'chamushim alu et Bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim." That the Bnei Israel came out chamushim, which according to Rashi means that they came out armed with weapons, ready to fight. Now the question can be asked, why, within all these miraculous events, and in reality, they were saved by the miraculous hand of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't have to fight. There was no need to engage in any warfare, of combat, of fighting for themselves. They didn't have to bring the weapons. They were being saved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu through nisim, through miracles. So what is this pasuk saying? That they came ready to fight. They came armed with weapons. So the Rebbeinu Bachai explains that there's an important message that's being conveyed, which is that a person has to do the hishtadlut. They have to put in the effort, and in the natural order of things, if you need to face an enemy, face and confront your enemy, then you need to be ready to fight. You need to be ready you put in the effort, the necessary effort to approach and face and take on the challenge and take on the enemy that you are facing. You can't just rely on miracles. This is an important message in sense of Amunah, of having obviously Amunah in the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it works in this dynamic of also being able to understand where our part is, the part that we have to play in doing our own ishtadlut, in putting in our own effort, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu might finish the process and perform the nes, but we have to make sure that we take ownership and responsibility for our part. And I think this really does play in nicely into therapy in general, and specifically actually for anxiety, therapy towards taking on the challenge of facing one's fears and facing the anxiety that they are suffering from. Because in anxiety, there's often an understanding that a person can respond in a fight or flight or freeze response, and as a metaphor, anxiety, especially when you're working with children, can be referred to as an enemy, some strong force, overpowering, overwhelming, evil enemy force that the person just feels they can't take on. And it's so tiring, and they're sort of trapped by this anxiety. They just feel that they can never overcome it. And often with children, you might refer to it as a monster or some sort of an enemy that you need to take on. And within the response to anxiety, often people are inclined, what happens is they enter into a fear state. The body enters into a fear response of fight, flight, or freeze, which is where either they're trying to run away, or they feel like they need to try and fight, or maybe they just freeze and are unable to do anything. And within the response of the Bnei Yisrael, facing their anxiety or facing the enemy of Mitzrayim, of the Mitzrayim, there were some that you could say were running away. They're running away, but as we know in anxiety, when you try to run away, when you try to get away from something, you try to avoid something, you actually just come back to strengthening the anxiety. And for the Bnei Yisrael, that some of them wanted to run away, they actually were going back, wanted to run away and get back to Mitzrayim. They wanted to go back to the fear, because sometimes the anxiety, even if they're trying to avoid it or trying to run away and they don't want to experience the anxiety, it's so familiar that they actually get trapped and they get stuck in this loop of anxiety. Those that try to fight, they're so engaged in the fighting that sometimes that doesn't actually help them to progress in any way. They don't overcome the anxiety and freezing. Some of the Bnei Yisrael just felt, as we read in the Pesukim, that they were just stuck. The Yamsuf in front of them, the enemy approaching. There was nowhere to go. This was a representation of fight, flight, or freeze in facing the enemy of anxiety. But interestingly, if we focus particularly on the pasuk of Chamushim, that they were armed, they were ready to fight. So here we're saying they were able to fight, they were prepared to fight, but in the end they didn't need to. There was no need to fight. They didn't have to fight. The process of getting out and getting away from the enemy, getting away from the anxiety happens miraculously, but through their own effort, through being prepared, through being ready. And this gives an important message that in therapy, in facing anxiety, often through the therapeutic process, there's a gradual exposure to the anxiety. There's a gradual message of being ready to facing the anxiety, but you don't need to run away and you don't need to fight. In particular, if we're saying you don't need to fight the anxiety, that's not actually helpful. It's a gradual exposure of being ready to fight, you could say, being ready to face the challenge, but by going through this, the natural order, as Rabbeinu Bachai says, the natural order of putting in your own effort, being ready to fight if necessary, adding tools, adding weapons, therapeutic weapons, as necessary through the therapeutic process, that you are ready to fight, but at the end of the day, it's not necessary. That is the therapy in itself. That is the process that's occurring in itself, is that you've put in the effort, you've done what you need to do, you're drawing closer and facing and exposing yourself to the enemy gradually, and that you feel that you're ready with the confidence, with the therapeutic weapons and tools that you've developed, that you can fight if necessary, but in the end, that's what the therapy shows you, that you don't need to fight. The miracle, the magic of therapy, in the sense that you start to see the relief, you start to see that you're coming out and you're getting away from the enemy, getting away from the anxiety. That's all through the preparatory stage of being ready, making sure that you're armed, making sure that you're able to confront your fears, confront the anxiety, and then we see the Geula and the Yeshua. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.